Chapter 221, Alliance 8. The Queen of Fury's alliance with the House of Mammon also had great strategic significance. She wasn't sure if the Mammon family had great power, but if she could join hands with them to counter the King of Gluttony, she felt she could produce good results. Although it was sad, the best way to stop war was something like a lovely dialogue. It was a powerful force that could even stop those refusing to talk. If you hit me, you'll get hit too. This kind of warning was straightforward and coarse, but it was the most effective means. If the Southern Alliance became strong, the King of Pride would not start a war easily, even if he beat the King of Envy. It's not just because my heart is pounding. As a matter of fact, the House of Mammon was a variable that the Queen didn't think about, but it was a very meaningful one. Her alliance with the Mammon family had sufficient strategic value. The Queen of Fury lightly pressed on her heart. She gently closed her eyes and counted the dates until her meeting with the master of the House of Mammon calmed down. It's around the corner. Nope. Why are you saying? Nervous Gardamundi burst into a silent laughter when the two repeated the same conversation 10 days ago. She watched the two engaged in a war of nerves with their chins on their hands. Time flew like an arrow. There was nothing unusual during the past 20 days. The King of Gluttony still did not reveal himself, and the war between the King of Pride and the King of Envy in the north was still going on slowly. Vimana, called a moving fortress and the dungeon of the Queen of Fury, was a unique dungeon even in the demon world where all kinds of different species prevailed. Vimana was built on the back of a living giant and giant turtle spirit. To be precise, Vimana was the name of the turtle, a dungeon created naturally on the back of a super large spirit. The Queen of Fury modified the dungeon somewhat and made it her palace. The only dungeon as unique as Vimana was the Sky Fortress, considered the dungeon of a nameless master in the north, which was built on a giant sky whale. Anyway, the Queen's dungeon could move. However, instead of moving Vimana itself, the Queen directly led her subordinates to the unclaimed land in the north because her moving Vimana would draw the attention of other kings. Finally, the day of her forming an alliance with the master of the Mammon family arrived. Since it was a secret alliance, the Queen of Fury was accompanied by only her close aides, Chwiryong and Gardamundi, as well as 5 people from each of her 8 clans. No matter how secret an alliance it was, she needed to show a proper decorum because the alliance itself was a sacred ritual. That was why she took a total of 40 people with her. Of course, they're going to serve as my bodyguards, just in case. Gardamundi took a fresh tour of the uninhabited wasteland in the north. Even though it was an open area, no one could be seen. It seemed that there would be nobody to spread rumors, even if something happened here. However, the Queen had to be prepared for contingencies. The master of the House of Mammon and his subordinates that she saw were far from weak. The 40 representatives of her 8 clan people formed their own groups and set up flags. As the power of their 8 mysterious flags came together, a blocking barrier was created over the surrounding area. Now, nobody could guess what was going on inside by watching from a distance. Anyway, calm down. Take a deep breath. Oh, I've never been nervous. Although she said that, the Queen took a gentle deep breath. Her chest went up and down a few times, which made her feel a little more relaxed. But where the hell was the master of the House of Mammon? The appointed time was close. Wasn't it time he appeared? Chwiryong asked Gardamundi inquisitively. Since it was an open wasteland, he could be seen anywhere if he was approaching by now, but there was not a soul in sight, let alone the troops of the House of Mammon. Chwiryong considered the Mammon master as the bridegroom for the Queen, but if he couldn't even keep the appointment, she would think twice. It was not just a promise, but a summit meeting with the Queen to form an alliance. I wonder if he is late. Instead of refuting Chwiryong's words, Gardamundi frowned and looked around again. If the Mammon master was willing to keep the appointment, it was about time he appeared from any direction in the open land by now. Chwiryong frowned even more, and the Queen was also a bit disappointed. Right at that moment, Gardamundi uttered with a blank expression, "No way." Gardamundi raised her head right away, and the Queen and Chwiryong, who was looking at her, also raised their heads instinctively. They opened their eyes wide at about the same time. Gardamundi uttered in an embarrassed voice, as if expressing feelings on their behalf. "Is he the Mammon master?" The clouds were scattered. there appeared a huge flying vehicle reminiscent of a red dragon from the far sky. Tiamat, the giant red dragon. The private flying vehicle of the Mammon Master left a deep impression on the queen and her close aides with its overwhelming force. And this was not all the performance that Yong-ho prepared. The hatch of Tiamat, the giant red dragon that landed far away from the queen, was opened. The first to appear from the flying vehicle was Skull and his 100 elite soldiers that had been selected from the Skull unit. The Skull unit, which marched, led by Skull, moved in perfect unison without any error, as if to boast of their synchronization. After a wonderful march, they lined up and opened a way. Since they were an undead army, they didn't move at all after stopping. Their black armor uniforms shone in the sun. Yong-ho walked on the road between them. Behind him were Catalina and Kaiwan, dressed in their best costumes. Ophelia, Eligos, and Tigrius remained inside Tiamat. They were on standby, just in case of contingencies. Chwiryong nodded in satisfaction, looking at Yong-ho, who appeared confidently in time for the appointment. Gardamundi narrowed her eyes, watching Tiamat, the giant red dragon, because it was far from any ordinary flying vehicle. The Queen of Fury stiffened like a piece of wood. Once again she pressed on her heart. Wow, it's real. Her heart was pounding very hard. Yong-ho approached the queen. The nearer he came, the harder her heart was beating. I'm honored to meet the Queen of Fury. My name is Yong-ho Cheon, the master of the House of Mammon. He first expressed due manners to the queen. Thanks to his practice overnight under the supervision of Kaiwan and Ophelia, the way he extended courtesy to her was perfect. But the queen could not respond. She just stared at him blankly. She didn't respond for about 5 seconds. When Yong-ho and his close aides began to be embarrassed about her silence, Chwiryong hurriedly shouted at the queen through her psychological interaction with her, "Your Majesty." Only then did the queen come to her senses suddenly. When she found him standing a few meters away from her, she held her breath once again, embarrassed by her pounding heartbeat. She was at a loss about what to do at the moment. She then hurriedly cleared her throat and barely opened her mouth. "Nice to meet you, Dhritarashtra." The head of the 8-clan people, Chwiryong, felt she ruined the whole thing. Her face got stiffened and her voice was stiff. When Chwiryong felt frustrated, Catalina rolled her eyes and looked at Kaiwan, who narrowed her eyes. However, Yong-ho himself did not feel anything strange about her response, for he didn't properly focus on her voice and facial expressions. His heart was pounding. It wasn't just because of his resonance with her. She felt a stronger impulse than he did when he encountered her at the auction house. Why? For what? He barely held down his strong greed that arose to engulf not only the queen, but also her aides. He gulped while his heart was beating fast before he knew it. Was the queen standing before him right now different from when he met her at the auction house? He looked down at her lower body and stared blankly at the metal belt wrapped around her slender waist. He knew it now. Barely holding back his urge to utter exclamation, he murmured to himself, "The godly energy of gluttony." The gluttony inside him was crying for it desperately. It showed a terrible longing for its other half. It was a very fleeting moment. The desire of gluttony was about to express itself outside. Unlike the desire of greed, Yong-ho was not aware how the desire of gluttony expressed itself outside. It was because he could detect the flow of the desire of greed, but not gluttony. But the problem was that the moment gluttony inside him expressed itself outside, it could be detected by the queen. After all, he brought out the power of greed. He did it almost instinctively because his action was very fast. His greed that arose fiercely swallowed up the sin of gluttony. It was tough because he had to suppress gluttony without exposing the power of greed to the outside. He controlled both sins by exercising strong control. A cold sweat broke out on his back. It wasn't because he was worried that the queen would catch him possessing the two sins. It was because it was so tough for him to control both sins at the same time. It was only a few seconds. With utmost concentration, his greed suppressed gluttony. He made sure his greed completely engulfed gluttony. The sin of gluttony did not reveal its craving anymore, even though the godly energy of gluttony was right before it. Only then did Yong-ho let out a sigh of relief. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but soon he realized he had made another mistake. He didn't have to feel relaxed just because the queen did not notice the sins of greed and gluttony for now. He was now standing in front of the Queen of Fury. All this happened only a few seconds, but he didn't even know what kind of expression he made because he couldn't pay attention to those around him due to his extreme concentration. He hastily looked straight ahead. The Queen was blinking, with her head tilted. He quickly opened his mouth without thinking deeply. Sorry. I heard the rumor that you are a beauty. I got distracted because you are much more beautiful than I heard about you in the rumors. It was ridiculous. Bullshit, just nonsense. Who the hell would be hoodwinked by this bullshit? What did he say? But the Queen's response was strange. The Queen, biting her lower lip slightly, looked down and twisted her body a bit. Her earlobes and cheeks turned red, which stood out because of her fair skin. This time, Yong-ho blinked blankly. Did his impromptu excuses pay off? Sensing his gaze, the Queen smiled awkwardly and said, "I'm flattered, but thanks for your kind words." Then she lowered her head as if she was shy. He blinked again, then looked at the Queen, feeling somewhat different about her. While the two were interacting like that, Catalina raised her tail, and Kaiwan looked at him fiercely, but no one noticed it because they just focused on Young-ho and the Queen. Everybody was silent for a few seconds, except for Kutimuka, who was moved, holding her hands together. Young-ho, who also came to his senses, escorted the Queen to the meeting place as he had practiced, and the summit between the two began. Chapter 222, Alliance 9. The summit meeting, which they started awkwardly, lasted for about an hour. But it seemed they got familiar while talking during the summit, or they came to know better their own position while conversing seriously. Both of them regained their usual composure in the middle of the talks. They even exchanged jokes, though briefly. Since they already discussed the framework of the alliance through their correspondence, they didn't need to talk long about the alliance itself. It was not an alliance that required the exchange of a treaty, but an alliance that literally established their friendship, so there were no details. The Queen went back to her aides, escorted by Young-ho. Watching her briefly, he concluded the summit by getting aboard Tiamat, the giant red dragon. But that wasn't the end of the talks. The Queen, who got aboard a small flying vehicle, sat comfortably in the captain's chair. Leaning against the chair comfortably, she said, "Hess, very strong." Her expression was serious. Kutimuka, who was going to ask her a barrage of questions about the Mammon Master, shut her mouth out of embarrassment, while Gardimundi agreed, calmly nodding. She lost her mind because her heart was beating so hard while meeting him, but she could find out several things about him. The Queen participated in so many battles and earned the title of warmonger. She saw countless strong men and experienced countless fights. Accordingly, she realized from her experience that the Mammon Master experienced deadly fighting that risked his life. It wasn't once or twice that he participated in such fights. He experienced literally numerous battles. Actually, she tested him several times during the talks. She made a gesture that could make him trapped gently but fatally. Every time she did so, he responded. His response was not deliberate, but simultaneous. It was mana that they valued most in the demon world. However, the one with strong mana was not necessarily a strong man. There were more important things in a fight. She could discover from her senses and experience that the Mammon Master was strong. He was much stronger than she expected. Gardamundi, the Mammon Master, Young-ho Cheon, is the flame his real power? Kutimuka's eyes sparkled at her question, or the way she called Young-ho. Unlike Kutimuka, however, Gardamundi focused on the very reason the Queen raised the question. She replied in a calm tone in a break with her usual cheerfulness. "I'm not sure. It is true that he handles flames freely, but I can't say he is the demon king of flames. As you know, there are many ways to deal with the flames even without using your power. As for the rumors that the Mammon Master beat a bone dragon, you said you didn't think the rumors were false, right?" "Right, Your Majesty," said Gardamundi. The Queen sorted out her thoughts once again, with her lips closed. Watching her quietly, Gardamundi added, "There is one more rumor I've come across recently." Gardamundi was a born scout. When she stayed at the tavern in the Free City, she didn't just spend time gambling. In addition to her existing information, she could gather additional intelligence about Young-ho while gambling, drinking, and buying things at the tavern. "I did not report to you because I was not sure, but I hear that the Mammon Master seems to have artifacts that increase the abilities of his subordinate spirits." Increasing his spirit's abilities. Yes, It's rumored that his artifacts increase their ability to change drastically, so much so that even their appearances are changed. In fact, she heard that some of the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon benefited from his artifacts. But Gardamundi took a step back and thought about it. Was it really because of the effects of their artifacts? Was it probably the power of the Mammon Master? Gardamundi didn't even have to explain because the Queen felt the same way. Maybe, I think we will get much more benefits from this alliance that we think. It was a sad fact, but the best deterrent against war was the powerful force that made the enemy dare not to attack. If the House of Mammon really possessed more power than expected, and if the Queen could form a true alliance with the Mammon Master, and the King of Violence could help her, she could build a really strong deterrence. Definitely, peace would continue for decades to come, even under the Cold War situation. The Queen and Gardamundi were serious at the moment. So was Chwiryong. She asked carefully while checking the Queen's expression. "Your Majesty, how did you feel about the master of the Mammon family?" As a Yacha, Chwiryong was clumsy at concealing her feelings. Since she knew why the Yacha woman asked such a question, the Queen quickly got up and turned around. She succeeded in concealing her blushing face, but she couldn't hide her earlobes that turned red. "I'm tired. Let me have some rest today." Chwiryong was satisfied with her response. She politely bowed to her with a mischievous smile. "Sure, have a good sleep." As Chwiryong and Gardamundi left the captain's room, she threw herself on the extra bed. Since she was really going to hit the sack, she turned off the light. When she met Yong-ho, she felt really strange. She felt her heart was pounding hard, but it was different from when she experienced it at the auction house. This time, she felt more intense feelings and a stronger impulse. Was this really love, like Chwiryong said, or was there something she was missing? She kept thinking about it in bed. Anyway, she had to keep in close contact with him for a while. She could check her feelings in the process. "Let me go to sleep now." Pulling herself together, she closed her eyes. But she opened her eyes within a few seconds. She raised her hands and placed them on both cheeks. Her face felt hot. "What should I do? I can sleep." When she closed her eyes, Yong-ho's face came to her mind. Her heart began to pound again, and she kept tossing and turning in bed. She is strong. Her manner is not the problem. It is a matter of pure strength. The Queen of Fury is stronger than the King of Gluttony. Yong-ho heard Ayamon's whispering from the flames of the Red Lotus in the air. He nodded. Actually, he felt it throughout the talks. He seemed to know why she had the nickname Warmonger, despite her fresh and pleasant images. What the King of Fury has must be the godly energy of gluttony. It's a pity that it's in her hands. Ironically, he had the godly energy of fury. In other words, the two had each other's sin that they needed. It would be nice if they could exchange the two, because they formed an alliance, but it was impossible right now. He briefly recalled the godly energy of gluttony wrapped around her waist, and understood why there was something sly in her attributes. He bit his lips slightly and quickly shook it off his mind. Tigreus said, "The Queen seems to have good feelings toward you more than I expect. We need to be cautious, but if you make good use of the alliance, I think you can think of taking control of the territory of the King of Gluttony. As you know, there are many things you can take even if you don't occupy the territory. It wasn't just the heart of the dungeon and the essence of the king. The numerous dungeon spirits that Yong-ho could make his own subordinates, and the wealth that the King of Gluttony had accumulated over the years were also something he had to take into account when he decided to march into the king's territory. The king and his 10 warriors were killed, Ophelia said. I think it would be okay if we deployed troops after reinforcing the Cadiz fortress first. The West was devastated, and all the Eastern masters have pledged their loyalty to you. So, if you are not concerned about the King of Violence and the Queen of Fury, you can concentrate all your power on the king's territory. In fact, the king's territory was a treasure without an owner. Yong-ho could march his troops without any hesitation, when other kings could not move for fear of the King of Gluttony's sudden disappearance. When they were engaged in serious conversation, Catalina, with her ears drooping, turned her gaze and looked at Kaiwan. When she signaled to Kaiwan, as if she was asking for the latter's advice, Kaiwan responded she would try to find the solution at night. Yong-ho, who did not know what was going on between Catalina and Kaiwan, focused only on what Ophelia was talking about. He sighed, tapping the map of the unclaimed land in the south, which was spread on the table. Am I the problem then? Although I have Tiamat and Salami, it takes too long for me to travel between the labyrinth of greed and Cadiz fortress. Yong-ho and Tigrius had to stay in Cadiz fortress in order to attack the territory of the king of gluttony. But Yong-ho had a lot to do in the labyrinth of greed. He had to conquer the arena. He also had to be recognized by Richard, the gatekeeper on the 8th floor. He also had to finish the synthetic evolution of Skull and the reinforcement of his subordinate spirits that he had put off for now. While no one could quickly come up with the right solution, the flames of the Red Lotus arose. Ammon whispered, "My master, if that is the case, there is a solution. Is there just a good solution on the 9th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed?" Yong-ho asked as if on cue, and his subordinate spirit's eyes twinkled. The flames of the Red Lotus waned a bit, as if to express embarrassment. "Well, that's right." Ophelia, who got so excited perhaps because of her experience on the 8th floor, approached the flames of the Red Lotus and asked, "What is the solution?" Since they were as thrilled as she, other spirits cast a glance at Ammon. Even Tigrius showed interest. Ammon laughed warmly, then whispered to not only Yong-ho, but the other members of the Mammon family, the integrated control center for the Door of Space. 2. It manages the space leap to the dungeon under his control, and Ammon blurred at the end, as if to make them fret about his answer. Ammon paused for a moment and continued. Protecting the 9th floor is Scorpion, the Grand Magician Magnodon who destroys the Earth. Ophelia's expression changed. Tigrius held his breath while Kaiwan and Catalina were amazed at the same time. Grand Magician Magnodon. His nickname was the Earth Destroyer, the one who changed the map. He was the most erratic and the greatest magician of Mammon's 12 spirits. The flames of the Red Lotus arose fiercely, radiating both yearning and joy at the same time. Chapter 223. Synthetic Reinforcement 1. The demon world was vast, so were the king's territories. Because of this, it often took more than one day for them to reach from one dungeon to another by riding a horse. Kings generally had dozens of dungeons under their control. Given the distance between dungeons took more than one day to reach, it meant dozens of days to travel back and forth between them. So, they needed to cross the whole kingdom to travel from one dungeon to another in the farthest place. Mammon, the great king of greed, thought about this problem. It's inefficient. So, Mammon installed the Door of Space in all dungeons, and he connected all the doors to make it one. The flames of the Red Lotus arose inside the giant red dragon, Tiamat, which was returning to the House of Mammon. Ammon continued to explain, "Of course, Mammon was not the first who created the Door of Space. He wasn't the first demon king to travel back and forth dungeons through the Door of Space, either. However, he was the first to connect dozens of dungeons. It can be said to be one of Mammon's great achievements. There were quite a few means of transportation with which they could move a long distance in an instant, just like Citrus cat carriage or the flying carriage of the dungeon market that he used when he visited the auction house of the dungeon market. But even those transportations were slower than the Door of Space, where they could move instantly. Really, is it true that there is a control center on the 9th floor that manages all the roads and doors?" When Yong-ho asked, the flames flared up more strongly. "Yes. However, you will not be able to use the connecting roads that Mammon had made. You must create the new connecting roads of your own. That's sufficient." Yong-ho's being able to move between the dungeons under his command in an instant meant that the range of activities of Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits, who were like tactical nuclear weapons in the human world, could be enormously expanded without attracting the attention of the enemy at all. But it's not perfect. There are only dozens of people who can move through the connecting road all at once, and you can only use it twice a day. Quotes, Kate, keep this in mind. It was impossible for Yong-ho to mobilize large troops by using the Door of Space. However, he was not disappointed. "That's why I have Tiamat." It wasn't just Tiamat. He planned to purchase a few more flying vehicles in the future. The option to purchase a large flying spirit and evolve it was also attractive to him. A large armed fleet flying through the sky. He felt like his wild ambitions were surging just by imagining it. "Then, are you going to go back and challenge the 9th floor?" Kaiwan asked, who sat right next to him, but he shook his head and said, "No, I need to prepare a little more." It was the Grand Wizard, Magnodon, who was on the 9th floor as one of Mammon's 12 spirits. In the legends, he was like a disaster, splitting the land and breaking mountains. Aemon said firmly that Yongho's fight against Magnodon was inevitable. Magnodon was different from Scathash or Richard. Whether he was crazy or not, Magnodon would chant an attack spell as soon as he saw Yongho. Catalina, who was sitting across Kaiwan, asked Yongho a bit timidly, "Would you like to make the silent warrior Richard your subordinate spirit?" His relationship with Richard, the guardian on the 8th floor, was very subtle. He didn't advise or help him like Scathach or Gusion, nor did he attack Yongho like Baphomet or Asclepius. He was just faithful to guarding the entrance to the treasure storage. At her question, Yongho said with his shoulders falling, "I would like to, but I have a little problem." "You mean any more vacancy for the spirit?" Kaiwan asked right away. Yongho nodded. Almond spoke again. "The master can afford to have one more subordinate spirit. Jets. Of course, if your power grows a little more, you can afford to have more subordinate spirits." When Ammon mentioned one more, he was referring to one like Mammon's 12 spirits, not a general dungeon spirit. Ophelia added, "The number of subordinate spirits is confined to 5 or 6, even if you are a king." The king of gluttony who controlled at least 7 subordinate spirits was very exceptional. The king of gluttony had 8 subordinate spirits, but what Ophelia actually saw was 7. Whether it was 7 or 8, however, it was clear that the king had more subordinate spirits than generally accepted. Each of the 7 deadly sins has its own special powers. Baal. As the current master of the House of Mammon, you probably know what the fundamental power of greed is. Although what Aemon said was somewhat off the main topic, Yongho just nodded again because he understood what Aemon was trying to say. Possessiveness. Was that the reason why Mammon could have as many as 12 subordinate spirits? Greed wanted to have possessiveness, because pure possessiveness was the source of greed. More subordinate spirits. It didn't matter whether Yongho had 5 or 6, greed longed for possession of more of them. Of course, it is thanks to the power of greed that Mammon could have 12 subordinate spirits. But his addition of the power of gluttony and fury also helped him control as many as 12 spirits. If he had not possessed 3 sins, he would not have made 12 spirits his subordinate spirits, no matter how strong Mammon was. Right now, Yongho had greed and gluttony. One day, he would be able to control as many as 12 subordinate spirits like Mammon. Anyway, is it a matter of choice for you right now? Kaiwan pointed out the heart of the matter. He agreed and said, "Richard hasn't recognized me yet. He only allowed me to use the treasure storage. I can obtain the power of trust that he allegedly had, but I'm not sure if I can make him one of my subordinate spirits." It was also not easy for him to force any reluctant warrior to be his subordinate spirit. Besides, this was the task of making one of Mammon's 12 spirits his own spirit. It was natural that he thought the task almost impossible. "If I dare to recommend you, I think it's better to make Gusion your subordinate spirit first, rather than Richard. Richard will never have a new master unless he is persuaded first. He would rather take his life if he was forced against his will." Richard was the man who kept the treasure storage of his deceased master for 1,000 years. It was ridiculous to compare his loyalty with that of the 12 spirits, but there were few who could be compared with him in terms of loyalty. "Skull! Skull!" Suddenly, Skull shouted. Catalina, who had watched Skull for as long as Yongho, understood what Skull tried to say. Flapping her ears several times, she said, holding his hand tightly, "I am on the same page as Skull. I will never serve any other master than you." "Me too, because I'm yours," said Kaiwan jokingly, hugging his arm. Embarrassed but delighted, he raised his head and said to Eligos, who was moving up or down his lips hesitantly, "Hey, Eligos. You don't have to express it because you know your heart. Same to you, Ophelia and Tigrius." Eligos' red skin turned even more reddish, and Ophelia smiled gently, looking at him. Tigrius cleared his throat to get out of embarrassment. Aemon whispered to everyone, "I said just one vacancy for the spot of our master's subordinate spirit, but I think it's not sufficient. The subordinate spirits of the master are rapidly becoming stronger. The master must also grow enough to accommodate them all. The power of evolution will lead the master and his subordinate spirits to a higher place." That was the case with Mammon's 12 spirits in the past. Even after reaching the peak of the demon world, Mammon and his 12 spirits continued to grow. Yong-ho clapped his hands loudly. Okay, I have to conquer the 9th floor in order to have Ophelia and Tigrius be in charge of Cadiz Fortress and go through rigorous fighting in the arena. Let's get ready as soon as we return. Cadiz was the northern fortress he occupied before his summit meeting with the Queen of Fury. It would take quite a lot of attention and renovation to rebuild the fortress that had been thoroughly destroyed by the invasion of 2 foreign enemies, Embryo and Stravadi. Turning his face away from Ophelia, who was about to cry, and Tigrius, who gently cleared his throat, Yong-ho made the announcement. Kaiwan hugged his arm a little harder and asked, "You said you have work to do before that." "Of course I do." Yong-ho's gaze turned to one of his subordinate spirits. Skullcull name, Black Dirges, category, Demon Sword. Black Dirge is a magic sword whose creator is unknown. Currently, the most prevalent theory is that Kakura Ladum, who was a blacksmith, made it with all his heart and soul for revenge. Posage, a Black Dirge, a magical sword in the form of a giant claymore, puts a powerful curse of death on the user. To anyone who surrenders to this curse, is resurrected as an undead and becomes a puppet of the Black Dirge. Black Dirge with a puppet repeats an indiscriminate massacre and increases the number of undead. However, those who overcome the curse will be able to perform necromancing with the power of the curse of the Black Dirge. Since the user uses the power of the magic sword, he can use it even if he is ignorant of magic. Tip of the Dungeon Market. Because the curse itself is to resurrect the opponent into an undead, the initial undead can use the Black Dirge. Sue. Warning from the Dungeon Market. C. Even if the user of the Black Dirge is an undead, anyone who is weak-hearted can be controlled by the Black Dirge. Once the curse is activated after purchase, no return or refund is possible for any reason. Chapter 224. Synthetic Reinforcement. 2. Yong-ho, who put down the item description catalog of the Dungeon Market, saw the Black Dirge on the decoration table. With the black evil energy blowing out like smoke, it looked like a magic sword. He felt like he would be cursed just by putting his hand on it. He picked up the second description catalog. Defective product. Category: Undead. As detailed category: Lich. It is a lich, created by using the Grand Wizard from an alien world as the material at the Dungeon Market. In general, it is common to use a live for the production of a lich. Even those who have become lich themselves prepare rituals in their lifetime. There was a low chance of success, because the Grand Wizard from the alien world was already dead when he was found. 2. Thanks to the accumulated know-how of the Dungeon Market, the Grand Wizard's body was successfully revived as a lich, even though he had been already dead. But, unfortunately, the lich who was born like that did not have a proper ego. 2. Although he was born with powerful magic and some necromancing magic, it is impossible to operate him properly, because he does not have an ego. It was not a prototype this time. It was a spirit that Citri specially saved from a warehouse where defective products were piled up. A huge skeleton, almost the size of Skull, was hanging next to the Black Dirge. Like the Black Dirge, it was blowing out a black evil energy, but it looked emaciated and wobbly. Even when its eyes were supposed to glare, they were just sparkling dimly. It was a defective product that could not be sold because it had no ego. However, there was no better material for Yong-ho than this. Okay, let's buy this. Yong-ho did not agonize which of the Lich and Black Dirge he would merge with Skull, for he had a much more efficient third option. Synthetic Reinforcement. It was different from general synthetic evolution, combining something called an item and something called a spirit, so it could be strengthened through synthetic evolution. This kind of synthetic reinforcement was possible only once for Yong-ho's subordinate spirits. However, it did not require evolution (EXP). Green light flashed in Yong-ho's eyes, and the green flames also arose from his arms. His subordinate spirits, who were watching inside an empty room in the corner of the 5th floor, gulped while holding their breath. He finally put his hand on the Black Dirge and Lick's shoulder. Then he activated the power of evolution. There was a tremendous light created. No, it was not light, but darkness. The light that emitted momentarily blurred his vision, creating a darkness in which he could see nothing. He felt his mana was sucked in an instant. About half of the powerful mana he released from his 6 horns was consumed at once in the process. The darkness was cleared again. Yong-ho urgently received the dungeon's reserve mana from Lucia. Slowly stepping back, he looked at the newly born lich through synthetic reinforcement. The lich had already changed on the surface. His hazy eyes and drooping posture were still there, but his body itself turned more combative. He looked very sharp, perhaps, as a result of merging with the sword. Black, evil energy raged. Combined with the lich's powerful mana, the curse of the Black Dirge became more powerful. Yong-ho gulped at the spectacular scene. Instead of stepping back, he turned around and looked at Skull. Skull. The curse of the Black Dirge was stronger than expected. The lich, who had no ego at all, was rather free from the curse, but Skull, who had a free will, was not. What if Skull was defeated by the curse of the Black Dirge? Skull. Skull spoke. He stepped forward with his purple eyes glaring sharply. Yong-ho could not understand what he was saying, but he understood it. Instead of worrying, he trusted Skull. Skull stood by the lich. Yong-ho saw the purple smoke rising up from Skull engulfing the lich. Yong-ho caught his breath. He felt his subordinate spirits behind his back were extremely tense, swallowing Skull. Skull laughed. Yong-ho laughed along and soon stepped forward. He put his hand on Skull's sturdy shoulder. Time for synthetic evolution. Yong-ho clenched his teeth. He poured out more mana than before. The lich threw out a black evil spirit, with his mouth wide open, as if he was screaming, and Skull firmed up his determination by bringing out purple flames fiercely. Once again, the light rose in Yong-ho's eyes, and the light gave birth to darkness. With his mana being exhausted, Yong-ho felt something different. He sensed a completely different power from it when he combined and reinforced the lich and the Black Dirge Mammon's godly energy. A purple light close to black emitted from the magic field on his left arm. It wasn't what Yong-ho intended. The death sealed inside the magic field, or the power of Baphomet, arose by itself. No one explained it. But Yong-ho understood it. Mammon's 12 spirits. They made the zodiacal signs their motif. It was a succession of 12 signs of the zodiac. Right at this moment, Baphomet's death determined his successor. A purple light, almost black, filled the room. It became more and more purple than black, and at one point, it emitted an intense light before disappearing. It happened only for a few seconds. However, Yong-ho could never forget those moments. Catalina opened her mouth before she knew it, and flapped her ears and tail. Kaiwan made a rather silly smile. Eligos and Ophelia blinked again and again, while Tigrius uttered exclamation quietly. His subordinate spirits felt each other through Yong-ho. Yong-ho understood the man more directly, who was standing right before his eyes. The growth of his subordinate spirits soon triggered their master, Yong-ho's growth. Then it spread to all of the other spirits. The 6 horns towering over Yong-ho's head shuddered. Other spirits also quickly erected their horns, keenly realizing that one of them had reached a whole new level. It wasn't something like the Death Knight. It couldn't be compared to anything like the Lich. It was called Brunani no Life King, King of the Undead. Violet light was burning from the inside of Skull's empty eyes. Skull. The energy of death was raging violently. It was powerful enough to overwhelm mana and cause dread and fear onto the living Yong-ho, and his subordinate spirits knew this energy of death. They had experienced the real energy of death, which was qualitatively different from the power emitted by the Bone Dragon or other undead Capricorn, Baphomet, the demon of slaughter. He was one of Mammon's 12 spirits, as well as the incarnation of death from another world. Someone swallowed. So did Yong-ho. He looked at Skull with a tense expression. His body got a little bigger. The lich's sharp look, who was merged with the Black Dirge, was reflected in him. The glaring eyes, located between the skulls wrapped in purple flames, were gentle. Instead of flashing for a moment, they were flames that seemed to burn forever. Skull. Yong-ho carefully called him. He was worried a little bit that he might have been swallowed up by the Black Dirge. His subordinate spirits also concentrated. Their connection with him was in full swing. Skull replied, Skull. His voice was the same, mixed with laughter this time. There was a very brief silence in the room, and soon they all smiled. Yong-ho sighed a breath of relief. It was Skull. Although he succeeded Baphomet's death and took the power of the Lich and the Demon Sword to surpass the Death Knight and Lich, his essence remained unchanged. He is still the same Skull that I know. Yong-ho was glad to confirm it, but he felt a bit sad because he expected Skull would be able to speak properly. Wait a minute. Did you say Skull? Yong-ho blinked. Catalina, who was in a good mood, flapping her ears and tail, looked at Skull, startled, as if she realized something suddenly. Kaiwan opened her mouth. Didn't he make a noise that was different from usual? What I mean is, Skull. Skull said it again, and Yong-ho's subordinate spirits were surprised again. Obviously, Skull was saying, Skull, but Yong-ho could understand its meaning. Apart from him saying Skull, Yong-ho felt like some sort of its meaning was conveyed directly into his head. It was as if Skull said something like, "Why are you so surprised? I am still the same as usual." When Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits were embarrassed again, Skull was also embarrassed this time. Skull tilted his head slightly and spoke again. Skull, was he saying, Master? Oh my God, Yong-ho uttered admiration, Tigrius said with a twinkle in his eyes. It's a powerful telepathy. As a result of synthetic reinforcement of the Lich, he seems to have realized the sorcery, namely his innate magical power sorcery. It refers to magic that is emitted by relying on one's will and innate strength, without arithmetic calculations. It's similar to a supernatural power or the way you control the flames. Yong-ho has also studied magic several times since he came to the demon world, so he knew what Tigrius was referring to as arithmetic magic. Oh, I see. He couldn't imagine how Skull used magic while calculating arithmetically. It was much more like him to just use his supernatural power by instinct. Skull, do you know what kind of magic you can use? At Yong-ho's question, Skull flashed his eyes as if blinking. After a little pause, he answered, Skull. He seemed to reply, I don't know yet, but I think I know what I can do. A purple flame arose from Skull's right hand. The flame soon turned into lightning, and Yong-ho realized that it was a lightning bolt with the energy of death. It was the lightning magic that Skull acquired when he became a magic knight. Skull handled lightning freely, just like Yong-ho handled flames. Skull scattered the flames into the air and created a new flame. Again, the flame had the energy of death this time, but it was different from the one a while ago. The lightning earlier was the power to kill the living, but this one was the power to resurrect the dead. Chapter 225, Synthetic Reinforcement 3. It's not just a Death Knight with Lich magic. Skull must be more than that. He could be called the King of the Undead. It's no exaggerated title, said Tigrius with great excitement. Yong-ho, who recalled the title of No Life King, also nodded. But he had one question. Why was it that Skull couldn't speak properly, even though he had been reborn as such a powerful being? Is it because of me? The power of the evolution was Yong-ho's power. Because of this, the evolution that his subordinate spirits experienced reflected his unconsciousness. Because of this, Catalina's ears and tail changed in a way that she could flap them well, or Salami had a handle on his back. Yong-ho briefly imagined Skull speaking fluently, but he soon felt very strange about it. In his opinion, Skull would be better off remaining as Skull, crying, Skull. As if he read Yong-ho's mind, Skull laughed, as always. The sound of Skull's laughter rang friendly. Aside from synthetic evolution, I was really amazed by the power of synthetic reinforcement. I still can't believe my eyes even though I witnessed it. I was amazed that you gave the power of artifacts to the spirits. When Eligos expressed admiration, Tigrius nodded violently too. Returning from an old gentleman to a wizard after a long time, Tigrius repeatedly emphasized the fact that Skull absorbed the core powers of the Black Dirge. Kaiwan hugged Yong-ho's arm and said, As I said before, I want at least a dragon heart. Please get a dragon heart and strengthen me through synthetic reinforcement. Can you do that? Synthetic reinforcement could give the power of artifacts to his subordinate spirits. If Yong-ho could obtain a dragon heart and reinforce it through synthetic evolution, as Kaiwan urged, she would be able to use not only amazing mana, but also the dragon's unique power, just like dragon breath, dragon peer, etc. Synthetic reinforcement could bring about a much more diverse combination than synthetic evolution that was only available to some spirits as undead or golems. As if something came to his mind, Yong-ho asked, Amon, did all the 12 spirits of Mammon go through synthetic reinforcement? Some of them did, but others didn't. Su. EIL. Let me remind you for the sake of caution, I did not go through synthetic reinforcement through a spear. To 7. It was not Mammon's will that I became a spear. At that moment, Catalina flinched because she thought Amon was born through synthetic reinforcement through a spear. Amon said, creating a soft flame as if he was smiling. Master, you have only one chance to bring about synthetic reinforcement per each spirit. However, if you save it, you can make a big mistake. Yong-ho seemed to know what Amon was talking about. Even in the game, if he saved skill points for the skills he would use in the second half, the process would become much more difficult later. Moreover, in reality, not in games, it might not be possible for him to reach the second half at all. Skull gained the power of the Black Dirge by mixing his synthetic evolution with the Lich, who went through synthetic reinforcement. In other words, Skull still had an opportunity for synthetic reinforcement. Well, this kind of expediency is also possible. It would take a long time to collect EXP enough to be able to bring about synthetic evolution once again. It was Skull that experienced the most evolutions among the dungeon spirits of the Mammon family. Probably the pace of him accumulating evolution, EXP, would be comparable to Aemon by now. However, Yong-ho felt satisfied with it. Skull still had room for growth. Skull still had a potential that he hadn't fulfilled yet. Yong-ho recalled the artifacts in Mammon's armory that Asclepius guarded. Those artifacts that he could put to use for the synthetic evolution of his subordinate spirits came to his mind one after another. While he was lost in thought, Catalina, who checked his expression rolling her eyes, raised her hand like a student asking a question. Amon, can I inherit Elun's power just like Skull inherited the power of the 12 spirits? Everyone was so surprised by synthetic reinforcement and the growth of Skull that they forgot one fact, which was as important as synthetic reinforcement and Skull's growth. Namely, Baphomet's death made Skull his successor. He delivered the essence of death to Skull. The essence of the 12 spirits was latent in Yong-ho's magic field. It was the same with the power of Elun or Asclepius, who had already died. She wanted to take over that power, so she could be the successor of Mammon's 12 spirits. Aemon smiled at Catalina, who singled out Elune. Then he answered gladly, yes, that's possible. Especially, your essence is very similar to Elun. If you are qualified, Elun's power, justice, will choose you. Catalina was glad to hear Aemon's reply, with her face blushing. Her tail fluttered in step with her slowly flapping ears. Kaiwan giggled at that and said, are you going to be a new addition to the 12 spirits? I mean, a mix of old and new generations of 12 spirits? Yong-ho's 12 spirits look great. Actually, the process was going on. Amon, who was Mammon's spirit, belonged to the 7 subordinate spirits of Yong-hos, and Gusion and Skathach would also stand by him. Okay, we must first conquer the 9th floor to do so. Let's move on courageously. As Yong-ho spoke vigorously, Kaiwan smiled and winked at him. Sure, why not me too? Skull. When Catalina sneakily cut in, Skull also chimed in openly. Yong-ho told Eligos not to, who was checking his expression at the moment, then ordered everyone, including Ophelia and Tigrius, let's take a break today. We'll have to tough it out starting tomorrow. He needed to conquer the 9th floor in order to normalize Cadiz Fortress and attack the territory of the King of Gluttony. Of course, the King of Gluttony was gone, and he formed an alliance with the Queen of Fury, but he still had a lot of work to do. Kaiwan grabbed Yong-ho's arm while everyone dissolved at his order. She whispered gently, by the way, Yong-ho, which one is prettier, me or the Queen of Fury? The Queen of Fury or Catalina? Who was more beautiful? Obviously, she asked the question, recalling the mistake that he made while talking with the Queen. Kaiwan smiled gently, and Catalina pricked her ears. Instead of facing Kaiwan's narrowing eyes, he kissed her forehead lightly and then turned around. Kaiwan was still hanging on his arm, but he didn't reply. Kaiwan pinched his waist slightly, and Catalina quickly caught up with him. Skull laughed loud on behalf of him. Skullco. No telepathy was transmitted to him this time. But Yong-ho was grateful for the fact that instead of speaking properly, Skull was acting just like him. More than 20 days have already passed since the death of the king of gluttony. With all of the 10 warriors, the core power, gone, there were few things Orlando the butler could do. He had sought the help of the 3 powerful masters defending the borders. According to Orlando's wishes, the 3 masters agreed to select a suitable successor among the children of the king. They had no disagreement over the fact that, for the time being, they had to hide the death of the king. Orlando, the butler, was relieved, and the 3 masters had a meeting among themselves without Orland. Although they argued over their achievements in the presence of the king in the past, they were surprisingly on the same page after the king was gone. It was futile to install the king's successor. None of the children of the king had the sin of gluttony. Only 6 countries existed in the demon world, and the number of countries equaled the number of kings. What did it mean? It was simple. It meant that a country could not survive without a king. The 3 masters did not think of defending the king's territory. They didn't even have the ambition to fight each other to be the next king. To whom would they dedicate themselves and their dungeons and dungeon spirits? Who would pay the most for their sales? It was natural that the 3 masters saw eye to eye on this. It was only those who had the same temperament as the 3 masters who could survive under the king. They couldn't move quickly now because they didn't know how the king died. So, they needed to watch the situation a little more while following Oraldo's will. However, it was possible for them to exchange opinions among themselves. The 3 masters discussed which king would guarantee them the most efficient outcome, and they were surprisingly of the same opinion. Although they departed from different parts, all of them turned their eyes at the same place in the map of the demon world. The sky of the demon world was red, and a crimson dragon spread his wings under the red sky, the king of violence. He was the largest and most powerful supreme being among the dragons. He wasn't in his rare hideout place anymore. He stood on the most important land in the demon world, which was unknown to most of the beings in the demon world. Mammon's memories left behind in the godly energy of greed confirmed it. It was this land, right here, the great king of greed, Mammon, died. The king of violence looked around again. The stairs leading up to that high sky no longer existed. It was the thing of the past, dating thousands and hundreds of years, closed a long time ago. Mammon was a man who saved the demon world in a place no one knew and disappeared from history because of his betrayers. The king of violence raised his head high. Looking up to the sky, he let out a low voice. A strong wind from somewhere scattered the truth that the king of sloth told, and the voice of the king of violence. The king of violence no longer had any lingering attachment. He soared into the sky, leaving the land behind, where Mammon met his last moment. He crossed the red sky of the demon world, which was not blue and should never be blue. Chapter 226, Scorpio Magnodon 1. There had been numerous kings since the beginning of the demon world. Those with the power of the 7 deadly sins reigned as kings and established their own kingdoms. However, no family has succeeded in carrying on the lineage of a royal family. The only exception was the royal family of the King of Pride. The reason why they did not create a royal family was simple. Their sins were not carried on to their successors. It was also impossible to transfer the sins in the usual way. It was highly likely that a family who once possessed the sin would produce offspring with the power of sin, but even such a family could not form a royal family. It would be easier if they killed the owner of the sin and take away his essence. In that case, they could kill the old king just before his death and inherit his sin. It was cruel, but at the same time, it was natural. Even in the human world, not the demon world, there were heinous children who killed their parents for money. They could do something crueler if they inherited the sins. However, the sins were not inherited that way. Anyone who had the qualifications of a king could take away the sins by killing the opponent as if to absorb their essence. But there was no way of knowing if the person had a king's qualifications. Even if the person who claimed to be the successor was not qualified as a king, the one who was old but obviously a king would lose his life for nothing. There was only one certain way to overcome the power of the sin. It was possible only when a king killed another king. In other words, the king who had a sin should take another king's sin by killing him. Therefore, the royal family was not created because there was no family that could satisfy the condition that the successor already had the sin. But the royal family of the King of Pride was different. The king's sin was naturally inherited from generation to generation. It was highly likely that the first king of pride, who acquired the sin of pride for the first time, had found some other way. Maybe the succession of the sin itself was a special ability embedded in the sin of pride. The only royal family in the demon world, the king of pride at that time, the master of the royal family of pride, looked down on the earth from the highest point under the sky. Everything was going on smoothly. The war with the king of envy was going on well according to his plan. The king of envy was slowly crumbling, and the king of lust wasn't making a move, crouching in his stronghold. In the south, the king of gluttony, who could not be more vulgar, and the queen of fury were busy keeping each other in check. He didn't expect that the king of violence intervened in their fight, but it was not a variable enough to shake his plan. There existed no king of greed. The king of sloth, who disappeared for more than 1,000 years, was virtually non-existent. So, everything went well. There were no significant variables. I just feel repugnant. It repulsed him for a long time that the Queen of Fury and the King of Gluttony, who were only negligible in his eyes, were leading a happy life after, taking possession of undeserved treasures. Besides, there was one more thing that made him feel displeased. The abandoned land in the south was unified. Although the unification was not complete, it was only a matter of time. The House of Mammon, a family that once enjoyed glory and fame. However, like most families that produced a king, the family crumbled because it failed to continue its lineage. He felt repugnant about the fact that a family without the sin unified the unclaimed land in the south. The kings in the south couldn't attack the unclaimed land because they were busy holding them in check. The King of Pride himself could not attack it either because he was in the north, totally opposite from the south. But that wasn't all. There was one fact that made the King of Pride feel anger, not just displeasure. An alien's blood was running in the current master of the Mammon family. The King of Pride was not sure which idiot of the Mammon family installed him as their master. The pure blood of the demonic blood was once again disgraced. A negligible master resurrected the failing Mammon family and unified the unclaimed southern land. The King of Pride caught his breath to subdue his anger. It was only now that the negligible kings were rampant. Everything was going as the King of Pride planned. The King of Pride turned his gaze back to the north from the south. He looked at the territory of the King of Envy, which would be his first target of attack. The Garden of Life was brutally invaded by skeletons and damaged by farming tools here and there. But fortunately, some of it was left intact enough to be called a garden. On the remaining lawn near the shore of the lake where Scathach's mansion was located, Uriah slightly lifted her skirt. After politely bowing, she opened her arms wide, watching Scathach sitting in the yard of the mansion over the lake. "Okay, let's start," Scathach responded with clapping. Uriah turned around with a rather tense look and said to the nearest ones who were lined up behind her back, "Baduk and Dungeon Meerkat, flip." Wall wall meowing meowing. The moment Uriah ordered them, Baduk and the baby Dungeon Meerkat jumped high and somersaulted into the air. It wasn't surprising to see Baduk, with strong muscles, be comparable to an ogre, jumping more than a few meters and turning it into a somersault, but the Dungeon Meerkat was different. No matter how light she was, it would have been impossible to jump many times over her body and tumble around. Uriah happily watched them doing a somersault several times, then looked back. She shouted loudly, "White Wolf, flip!" The leader of the wolf herd, led by Embryo, which had unusually grey hair, made a sullen expression as if to boycott her order, but eventually he hit the ground and made a somersault. Uriah's face turned red with excitement. She cried out louder, "Now, everyone, do it together!" The grey wolf, the leader of the herd, was turning a somersault with others. A dozen wolves also jumped high and somersaulted into the air without any complaints. Everybody was amazed at a dozen wolves tumbling at the same time. Scathach got up from her seat and applauded. "Great, you're really doing well. I was impressed with you, sis, hehehe." When Scathach praised her, Uriah smiled shyly and twisted her body a bit, as if she was shy. But when they heard the baby Dungeon Meerkat struggling with a moan, Uriah stopped them immediately. Lucia, who was watching them doing somersaults, uttered admiration somewhat differently from others. "She has such a strong ability to control the crowd." It looks like, as a result of repeated evolution, her ability as a Princess Crazy Ant has been sublimated into a monster tamer's talent. Monster tamer did not mean a simple trainer. A monster tamer was a trainer who brought out more of their power by empowering monsters. Just like the ability of the Queen Crazy Ant to rule her colony sublimated into the talent of a monster tamer, Uria's power was quite strong. The power of evolution reflected Yongho's unconsciousness. As a result of repeated evolution, Yuria could no longer be called Princess Crazy Ant anymore. It would be impossible for her to become a queen ant because too many parts of her body had been already humanized. However, she acquired a powerful ability to control the crowd instead of becoming a queen ant. If she could use her ability well, she could lead a mighty legion that could not even be compared to her crazy ant colony. Isn't she praiseworthy? Lucia saw the Garden of Life on the first floor and the treasure storage on the 8th floor at the same time. Yongho nodded, standing on the 8th floor or on the stairs connecting the 8th and 9th floors. Like Lucia said, she was praiseworthy. He was suddenly moved, feeling a tug at his heart. Maybe the doting daddy feels the same way toward his daughter. He giggled quickly before he knew it, then got things about Uria out of his mind. It was time he had to focus on more important things. A week passed after his summit meeting with the Queen of Fury. During that period, Yongho, who had enough rest as well as training in the arena, headed to the 9th floor with all of his subordinate spirits. Scorpio, Grand Wizard Magnodon, who destroys the land. His nickname was never an exaggeration. As Mammon's wizard, he was the best wizard of his time. The 9th floor had exactly the same structure as the 8th floor, but they had different dungeon monsters occupying several empty rooms on their floors. Yongho and his subordinate spirits moved forward, literally sweeping away the dungeon monsters. Soon, they reached a large door. Compared to the 8th floor, it could be the entrance to the treasure storage. Master, please stop for a moment. I feel the energy of my old friend. Ayamon's voice was transmitted not only to Yongho, but also to all his subordinates. He stopped, as Ayamon instructed, and looked at the steel door embossed with a large scorpion. He immediately found out which energy Ayamon was talking about. 7 colors of mana swirled in front of the steel door. The combined mana soon became a circle, and it soon changed into the shape of a human again. It wasn't real. Like Elun's memory that appeared on the 3rd floor, it was an alter ego left by Magic Grand Wizard Magnodon. He was a being as if he personified a scorpion. He covered almost all of his body with a red cloak, but a large, heavy tail not covered by the cloak proved it. His hair, with a white beard on bronze skin, was no different from a human, except for his red eyes and pupils. Chapter 227. Scorpio Magnodon 2. The translucent Magnodon's alter ego didn't attack Yongho recklessly, just like Ayamon first said. He said, looking straight at Yongho, "Has the master's successor finally appeared? It's been such a long time, Magnodon." The flames of the red lotus arose right next to Yongho because even Amon, who was usually calm, couldn't stand it. Magnodon was certainly alive that last day. He didn't die. Then, why didn't Magnodon himself, not his alter ego, appear? Magnodon looked at the flames of the red lotus with mixed feelings of longing and joy. He responded to Amon's call with a smile. "Yeah, Amon, I am already dead. Not long after I arrived at the Labyrinth of Greed, my energy was all exhausted." As soon as he finished talking, he shook his head. He continued even before Amon could say something. "Amon, my friend, don't make an expression like that. Who do you think moved the whole Labyrinth of Greed? And who do you think maintained the Labyrinth of Greed and our 12 spirits? As a matter of fact, I was injured severely at that time. As I used up all my energy, it's natural that I died." It was as if he was talking about somebody else. He even laughed heartily on his own, then turned his eyes from the flames of the red lotus to Yongho. He nodded politely out of courtesy. "I apologize for the late greetings. I am Magnodon, my lord Mammon's wizard Im Yongho Cheon, the master of the current Mammon family." When Yongho introduced himself, Magnodon moved his eyelids as if he was hesitating for a moment. He opened his mouth again after looking back at Kaiwan, who stood by him with a somewhat nervous expression. "You are the new king of greed. If so, you must be my lord's successor. But I didn't expect it would take over 1,000 years for you to appear before me like this. I think my lord's arrangement for his successor paid off anyway. In any case, I'm glad that his successor has appeared, he muttered to himself. Then didn't give Yong-ho and Kaiwan any chance to respond, just like he did with Amon. He said, opening his arms wide, "Let me tell you bluntly, there are lots of magic traps inside this door that I have made myself. Indeed, it is a series of traps that reflect the producer's malice." He was a typical evil sorcerer, given that he was laughing, mentioning his malice. Magnadon stroked his long white beard and said, "At the end of the room, there is a control device that can control the traps. And beyond that, there is a control tower that I can describe as the true purpose of the existence of the 9th floor. This is the trial I have prepared for Mammon's successor. And surely, Amon might wonder why I have put so much effort into something like the control tower. Tut, tut. That's why you can't go far. The control tower is more important than you think." He poured out words, as if he was doing both sides of the conversation. Magnadon took a step closer to Yong-ho, as if he wanted to emphasize his point. The network built by Mammon in the past does not include only the dungeons under his command. His network reached all over the demon world. It was an important point. It was like a solid rock amid a flood of words he poured out. Magnadon laughed again after reading his expression. Then he continued with a satisfied expression. "Of course, over 1,000 years have passed. Many parts of the network collapsed, and probably there are lots of places where the gates of space built everywhere in the dungeon world were destroyed, so you might not be able to pass, but there are still some places left intact. I think you know about it, even if I don't tell you anything more." What Yong-ho first expected was just the door of a space where he could move between the dungeons. But if it was true that the network was also connected to other places beyond the unclaimed land in the south, as Magnadon said, this was a really big deal. Magnadon took another step back. This time, he bowed deeply to Yong-ho, then pointed to the steel door with a theatrical gesture. He said provocatively, "It's my masterpiece. I hope you can lightly break through it." Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits turned their eyes at the steel door all at once. The embossed scorpion moved according to Magnadon's gestures, and the steel door was soon opened. "Kill it, Wipe Shield." "Hey, Yong-ho," and Kaiwan's voices were mixed in the air. At the same time, Yong-ho, who held her waist, lifted her high and blocked the front, while Kaiwan activated the power of distortion toward the front. Various magics threatening to devour the two began to scatter into the wrong places when the power of distortion distorted the attack trajectory of the magics Yoshi Grando season. "What the heck is he saying now?" Yong-ho cheered up, watching the magics exploding in the wrong places, and Kaiwan concentrated on the power of distortion while cursing profusely. She converted Yong-ho's mana, transmitted through the Brigada ring, into the power of distortion. Yong-ho and Kaiwan were currently located halfway through the trap room prepared by Magnadon. Like Magnadon warned, the room was full of magical traps with Magnadon's malice. Yong-ho had seen the greatest number of magic since he came to the demon world. Of course, it did not mean that Yong-ho suddenly went crazy. Normally, he would have used himself, not Kaiwan, as a shield. Although they were arguing over this issue, both already agreed before they left. It was Kaiwan who mentioned it first. "Hey, Yong-ho, just in case, use me as a shield and run. As you know, I'm much better than you in controlling the power of distortion." When Kaiwan, who had the power of distortion, was determined to defend, the strength of her defense was beyond imagination. However, in that case, she could not move, which was a fatal weakness. So, she tried to solve this problem by letting him hold and present her as a shield against the opponent's attack. They agreed on this, and it was Kaiwan who brought up this issue first. "But this is unfair. How come you are using me as a shield even if I okayed it? You asked me to do so, right? Granted it, I feel terrible more than you think." What she imagined was rather romantic, such as Yong-ho running with her in his arms as if she was a princess. But he grabbed her waist and lifted her up. Although she was ready for it, she felt really disappointed when he treated her roughly like a shield. In short, she was upset. Right at that moment, when she was screaming, he violently swung her to the right, Kaiwan to the right, shield of darling. "Arga. I'm going to see you later at night." "Got it." "Why night?" He laughed instead of flinching. Although he was in the midst of an enormous magical storm at the moment, He kept laughing. Magnadon, who watched them from a distance, made a comment befitting him. He really looks silly, but awesome. In fact, Magnadon could not find any more appropriate word than awesome. It was a trap room made by Magnadon himself, who was called the best wizard during Mammon's reign. Each of the activated magic was very powerful and fatal, but Yong-ho was breaking through the trap room very fast and recklessly braving it from the front at that. That kind of breakthrough was generally impossible. Strong gravity magic was in effect in the trap room. Normally, anybody trapped in the room could not even walk because their legs were held by an invisible force. Yong-ho wasn't just running with Kaiwan as a shield. He also continuously released mana. He stopped the interference of gravity magic with a lump of pure mana. Magnadon widened his vision to check the paths that Yong-ho passed by. From the entrance of the trap room to the middle point where Yong-ho started using Kaiwan as a shield, a huge number of corpses were scattered everywhere. All of them were the bodies of the dungeon monsters that Yong-ho used as his shields. What Yong-ho did as soon as he encountered the trap room was to bring back as undead all the bodies of the dungeon monsters he had encountered on the 9th floor. Of course, Yong-ho did not do it himself. No Life King Skull, who was reborn as the powerful undead king, supervised the work. Skull did not memorize complex magic spells. Having learned necromancy as sorcery, Skull resurrected the dead by releasing the energy of death with only his will. As they didn't go through any special process, the only thing Skull had to do was to resurrect them as zombies, which were moving bodies. But that was enough. Hundreds of corpses themselves were excellent shields. For Yong-ho, Magnadon also glanced at the other subordinate spirits near Skull. With their eyes closed, each of them was concentrating to deliver even a little stronger and pure mana to their master Yong-ho through Brigada. A smile was on Magnadon's. Although they were not comparable with Mammon's 12 spirits, he loved their close connection with their master. Their ability to exchange mana with Yong-ho smoothly proved that he was not only very competent, but he also had firm solidarity with them. Magnadon looked straight ahead again. Yong-ho was still blocking the magic, wielding Kaiwan. It was an unsightly scene. But Magnadon, who thought a demon king was supposed to be evil in nature originally, expressed satisfaction with his personality rather than blaming it. If he really conquers the next floor, I have no other choice but to recognize him. The last magic trap in the trap room. The swirling magic storm of the 7 attributes. Magnadon, the greatest wizard of the demon world, could use all of the 7 major magical elements of wind, fire, water, earth, lightning, light, and darkness. The vortex of the 7 major attributes created by Magnadon was very destructive and dangerous in itself. It will be difficult for him to push them out with just mana. Since the vortex itself is big, it would be impossible to distort the orbit like he did a moment ago. If so, what would he do? How could he conquer the floor? Chapter 228. Scorpio Magnadon 3 Kaiwan, who focused only on the power of distortion instead of blaming Yong-ho as if she gave up, sensed that something had changed. The mana swirling in front of her eyes was different from what she used to know. Yong-ho, what the heck? Even before she called him, Yong-ho pulled Kaiwan, who he put up as a shield, into his arms suddenly. He looked straight at her, with more intense concentration than before. Kaiwan, who was held in his arms all of a sudden, immediately shut up after trying to say something. Instead, she buried her head on his chest and focused her consciousness on the Brigada ring. She passed mana to him, the vortex of 7 attributes mana. Yong-ho already experienced it. He recalled the trial he had to face in order to unlock the 8th floor treasure storage. It was foolish to confront this kind of force with the same force. Rather, he had to adapt to it. It was important for him to naturally go with the flow of mana. The silver light of harmony, symbolizing Yuho Yuan, arose from the godly energy, namely the magic field attached on his left arm. He changed the attributes of the sequentially released mana by substituting the attributes of Yong-ho himself and his subordinate spirits into the vortex of mana one by one. He harmonized with it instead of colliding with it. Magnadon opened his mouth wide. Although he originally made the vortex of the 7 attributes in mind, he never thought there would be anybody who could really overcome it. The vortex of the mana began to crumble little by little. Each of the 7 attributes disappeared one by one, and when it happened, The speed of the vortex also slowed down. At last, the vortex disappeared. The mana of the last flames faded from the air, just like the green flames of Yong-ho. The sky after the storm was supposed to be calm. There was a zone of mana created in the trap room. Yong-ho opened his eyes. Cold sweat broke out on his back, but he smiled. Kaiwan, who opened her eyes slightly and looked up at Yong-ho, hugged him tightly. Although she was upset that he roughly swung her as a shield, she forgot it now and thought he was cool. Her heart was pounding. Yong-ho's subordinate spirits at the entrance opened their eyes one by one and breathed a sigh of relief. Catalina flapped her tail pleasantly. Now, Yong-ho passed all the tests. Once he went through the room with no mana, Magnadon's test would be over. When everyone thought so, Magnadon laughed slyly once again. Originally, the trap was supposed to catch him off guard. So Yong-ho needed to realize that it was the most dangerous moment when he felt relaxed. The last trap was simple. It was a lump of pure and powerful mana. It was also the last mana that Magnadon himself left behind while dying. Yong-ho took a step. He passed through the zone with no mana. He needed to take only a couple of steps to the final destination. At that moment, mana poured from the ceiling to the floor. Kaiwan, held in his arms, hurriedly raised her head, but it was too late. She had no time to activate the power of distortion. Various voices could be heard from everywhere. Each of Yong-ho's subordinate spirits at the entrance was screaming. Magnadon saw it. He blinked and soon laughed out loud. The godly energy of fury mounted on Yong-ho's right hand opened its mouth wide like a beast. A lump of brigada, it accepted the sin of gluttony. It literally swallowed up the pouring mana. It was possible because what poured out of the ceiling was a mass of pure, not processed mana. For the past 1 week before he challenged the 9th floor, Yong-ho spent the whole time in the arena. He wanted to learn how to use the godly energy of fury and the sin of gluttony that he obtained recently. The king of gluttony used the godly energy of fury to devour everything. Of course, the original purpose of the godly energy of fury was far from it, but it was a pure and huge mass of brigada. It was more than enough as a medium to release the power of the sin of gluttony that the king had. If the attribute of greed was possession, that of gluttony was devouring. So, the sin of gluttony devoured Magnadon's lump of mana, greed then possessed it. After overcoming the last trap, Yong-ho didn't hesitate to move on and threw himself into the safe zone arrived. Standing on a large platform, he turned around and looked at the entrance. Catalina flapped her ears and tail while Ophelia and Eligos clapped. Tigrius also did not hide his admiration. Magnadon put his hand down while stroking his beard. As if he put down a heavy baggage, he let his shoulders droop and said warmly, "Young master, you have passed all my tests. I would like to recognize you as the true successor of the House of Mammon." Magnadon didn't just pay lip service. Yong-ho felt a new force was added to the magic field on his left arm. He naturally raised his left arm and saw a new light. It was golden, like the glory of the morning. Passion, the power of Magnadon, was reflected in the godly energy of Mammon. Unlike Elune, Magnadon did not disappear immediately after transferring power to Yong-ho. He still had one more mission left. As Amon has already told you, you have to create a new network of your own. But you don't have to abandon the old network built by Mammon at all. It would be best for you to build a new network based on the old one. The network created by Mammon is truly vast. Magnadon, who poured out his words eloquently, fidgeted with his hand, standing on the platform at the end of the trap room. Then, the entire trap room vibrated, revealing the true image of the 9th floor. The doors of the space rose from the 9th floor. It was not 1, but 9 in total. In addition, a waist-high cylinder rose above the platform. Magnadon triggered the controller by moving his hand again on the cylinder. A light map of the demon world emerged above the cylinder. Magnadon moved his fingers again, and blue magical light appeared everywhere above the map. Yong-ho knew it without his explanation. They must be the network of the doors of space that was left intact even now. The light also shines in the north. There are also light in the territory of the king of gluttony. Ophelia shouted before she knew it. Though there were not many, there was some blue light outside the southern unclaimed land. Although there was only one light, it was there not only in the territory of the king of gluttony, but also that of the queen of fury, that of the king of envy. and even that of the King of Pride in the far north. Mammon did not build a network. Only in his dungeons. He hid the doors of space throughout the demon world. Catalina, looking at the light map with her eyes open wide, reached out and pointed to the blue light in the territory of the Queen of Fury. Don't you think it's moving? Indeed, it did, like she said. The blue light she pointed at with her fingertips was moving really slow. Instead of explaining, Magnadon operated the controller to enlarge the blue light that she was pointing at. Then, a window of light with tips about the location of the blue light appeared in the air. Vimana, oh my! That turtle is still alive. Magnadon burst into laughter lightly, as if he was glad to know that the turtle which he saw during his time 1,000 years ago was still alive. His voice was filled with a pleasant surprise, but Ophelia and Tigrius' expressions changed instantly. She approached Magnadon and asked urgently, Magnadon, did you say it was Vimana turtle demon, Vimana? Yes, it's even famous these days, right? Magnadon said, as if to humor a child. Ophelia raised her hand and covered her mouth. There was still a big surprise in both of her eyes. Ophelia, Young Ho called her in a low voice, as he could not figure out what she was talking about. Only then did she come to her senses and said calmly, Vimana is the dungeon of the Queen of Fury. It's a dungeon placed on top of a giant turtle monster. It is a kind of movable fortress. Yong-ho recalled the ancient universe view he had seen one day. It was a picture of an elephant on a turtle, then a land on it again. However, that picture disappeared from his mind instantly because he understood what she meant. Wait a moment. If so, is any door of space in our network connected with Vimana? Exactly. If you want it, you can always go to Vimana through the door of space. If my memory serves me right, her dungeon is inside Vimana's shell, said Magnadon, who grasped the situation while talking with them so far, with a laugh. The door of space connected to the dungeon of the Queen of Fury, not anyone else. Given that the network was still intact, it was clear that the Queen of Fury did not know the existence of the door of space Mammon had built. The Queen of Fury was a strong ally who formed an alliance with the Mammon family. However, he didn't need to let her know the door of space. The door of space located in the shell of Vimana would certainly play an important role someday. It seems important that this network is still intact, not only in the territory of the King of Pride, but also in the King of Gluttony's territory. If you use it well, you'll be able to target only the core of the King of Gluttony's territory. Tigrius reminded everyone of the core point. As he said, what was important to the Mammon family right now was not the network connected with the Queen of Fury, but one connected with the King of Gluttony. The King of Gluttony was no longer alive. His right-hand men, the 10 warriors, were also gone. Except for the Mammon family, there were no outsiders who knew this. Yong-ho already learned the war of the demon world while fighting in the unclaimed land. It wasn't necessarily the best way to conquer the territory and own it. What mattered was to lap up the cream. Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits looked at the map of the demon world. As if they promised to do so, their eyes turned to one place. Chapter 229. Surprise Attack 1. It was no exaggeration to say that the soul of the dungeon and its master were one in body and soul. The growth of the dungeon master soon led to the growth of the dungeon, and vice versa. Lucia also had a strong control of the dungeon, now that could not even be compared with in the past. Nonetheless, she still needed more power. The Labyrinth of Greed, or the dwelling place of Mammon, the great king of greed, demanded much more power than now. In particular, Lucia had to skip the 7th and 8th floors to conquer the 9th floor, which was a big challenge for her because she had to cross the 2 floors remotely to reach the 9th floor. Lucia barely managed to take control of the 9th floor, but her control was incomplete. She needed to grow a little more in order to completely control the 9th floor and control all the remaining floors of the Labyrinth of Greed, including the 7th and 8th floors. The easiest way to grow the soul of a dungeon, Lucia, was to feed her the dungeon's heart with the essence of the dungeon that was collected from the heart of another dungeon. Here was the problem. The number of dungeons in the unclaimed southern area was reduced to less than half because of the civil war that took place in all sides of the east, west, north, and south. Yong-ho, who had to dominate the enormous territory of the unclaimed southern area, had to stop the dungeons from shrinking anymore. Because of this, he gave up the idea of obtaining the essence of the dungeons from the dungeons in the unclaimed southern area. What he should aim for was the dungeons outside the unclaimed area. There was prey, of course. It was also very tempting and could be obtained relatively easily. Numerous dungeons located in the territory of the King of Gluttony. Although the masters under the command of the King of Gluttony were still alive, the king who controlled them and the greatest deterrent against the invasion by other kings disappeared, and it was only the House of Mammon that knew the fact. Missing such a golden opportunity was simply ridiculous. In general, there were two basic ways to attack dungeons. One was the standard attack, by mobilizing a massive military force. More than 80 of the dungeon battles that took place in the demon world were fought in this way. They advanced by dismantling the dungeon's defense forces and traps by using a number of dungeon spirits. In this case, the damage to the general dungeon spirits was enormous, but this kind of fight could reduce the damage of the elite forces, including the master's subordinate spirits. Moreover, in terms of occupying and dominating the dungeon, they had no choice but to mobilize a large army. The stultifying massive mobilization of troops by Vizaro, Embryo's right-hand man, was such an example. Although his force was small in scale compared to Vizaros, Foras used a similar method when he attacked Yong-ho. The other way was to mobilize a small number of elite troops. The stronger the elite troops were, the less damage they suffered. Besides, they reduced the time of attacking the dungeon. Since the size of the troops themselves was small, it was good to mount a surprise attack that the other party never expected. However, it was a bad way to dominate the dungeon. Moreover, it carried a high risk because they had to send the elite troops into the dungeon where there might be an unknown danger and trap. In the worst case, the existence of the attackers would be put in jeopardy. Yong-ho experienced both the pros and cons of the second method as the attacker as well as the defender in the past. He did not mobilize many troops to attack the eastern area. It was Yong-ho himself and his 6 subordinate spirits that attacked Stravardis dungeon. Because of this, he did not lose a single spirit in the process of capturing Stravardis dungeon. At that time, he took the initiative to attack Stravardis dungeon, so he could minimize the damage to his troops. The King of Gluttony used the same method as his when he attacked the House of Mammon. However, the king suffered a great loss, contrary to Yong-ho. The 10 warriors that he sent first were annihilated. Then he himself went out next, only to lose his life. The reason that the King of Gluttony moved in person was because he lost the 10 warriors, his right-hand men and loyal bodyguards. When the king was killed in the battle, his territory was reduced to something like an empty shell. The 2 dungeon battles not only cost the king his life, but also shook the foundation of his kingdom. Yong-ho was lost in thought while looking at the map of the demonic world that marked the territory of the King of Gluttony. After thinking hard, Yong-ho made the conclusion. He could not use the first method, namely using the massive troops to attack the territory. Although Skull and his unit, as well as the Black Orc Squadron, which were the elite forces of the Mammon family, were powerful but numerically too few, he realigned the troops in the process of occupying the unclaimed area in the south. But the number of troops he could mobilize at the moment was less than 200. It was unreasonable and absurd for anyone to attack the north with these troops. Moreover, if he attacked the north with massive troops, it was highly likely that the absence of the King of Gluttony would be exposed to the other kings too quickly. As it was always the case, he needed time. The later the news about the death of the King of Gluttony became known, the better. And the less the other kings, including the Queen of Fury, held him in check, the better. Because of this, he had no other choice but to choose the second option, namely using the elite troops. He had to attack the dungeon by using the best elite troops. Although the King of Gluttony was gone, the dungeons under the command of the late king could not be compared with the unclaimed land in the south. Moreover, it was better for him not to mobilize all his subordinate spirits to realize his bigger dream in the coming days. From his point of view, the attacker who would infiltrate the dungeon under the King of Gluttony should not be the House of Mammon. For him, a mysterious force with unknown identity would be the ideal attacker. If that was the solution, what should he do? What other troops should he use than his subordinate spirits to attack the dungeons under the command of the King of Gluttony? Were there any available troops in the Mammon family? Of course, there were such troops. They certainly existed. Yong-ho expressed a small appreciation to the king of gluttony, who was like a tree that gave everything to him generously. That's fine with me, but why do you want this place? Said Gusion with a sullen expression, the owner of the arena. Yong-ho responded by warming up slightly in the arena. It's strong here, it's good to fight. Right now, they are in the thick of farming in the Garden of Life. Gusion wanted to remind him that the Garden of Life was originally a place for ornamental plants, not for fight or farming, but he only sighed. He suddenly recalled Skathak's letter, in which she complained about the stench of fertilizers. I miss Skathka, you will see her soon. After answering readily, Yong-ho relaxed his shoulders. He took a deep breath and corrected his posture before looking at his subordinate spirits, who stood in the arena like him. They were standing in a large circle with the center empty. Everyone, get ready. We're going to start right away. As soon as he spoke, each of his subordinate spirits took their position. Kaiwan giggled and let down her whip sword, and Catalina erected her tail stiff as if she got nervous. Ophelia and Eligos relaxed their ankles and wrists, respectively, and Tigrius gently swung his cane. Skull, the most important figure in carrying out Yong-ho's plan, announced that he was ready by laughing loudly. After checking the condition of his subordinate spirits, he looked back. He shouted at Gusion, who was sitting in the special stand at a distance, "You can help me just in case, right? I don't think you need my help." Gusion was being sarcastic pleasantly. In fact, he was so glad to know that Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits grew up to the point that they did not need his help. Yong-ho caught his breath again. He bit his lips slightly, which became dry as he became tense, and licked them. He then closed his eyes and concentrated his consciousness. What he was trying to wake up was his desire for gluttony and the mana of the king of gluttony that he swallowed with the power of greed. His greed possessed everything that belonged to the late king. It was indeed a very greedy extortion. Yong-ho found out about one of them. He deceived one that he had found with the sin of gluttony and the mana of the king of gluttony. Yong-ho made himself mistaken for the king of gluttony, then ordered that the door of space be opened. The contract formed by magic followed Yong-ho's command. By carrying out the contract, Yong-ho opened the door of the hidden space. When the space opened in front of Yong-ho, there appeared several beings with great power. Vampire lords, death knights, elder liches, bone dragons. Each one of them was the top undead who could overwhelm people with their names alone. The number of those spirits purchased by the king of gluttony in a secret deal with the dungeon market for a battle with other kings was less than a dozen, but each one of them was already tantamount to an army of monsters. Yong-ho did not call out all of the undead in the space. He only summoned those monsters that the king of gluttony had reserved to attack the House of Mammon. Although he intended to do so from the beginning, he could summon them successfully because he used the most recent records on their summoning: 5 vampire lords and 11 death knights. Chapter 230, Surprise Attack 2. Suddenly summoned, they were in a big confusion. Apparently they appeared after being called by their master, the king of gluttony. But the king was not seen anywhere. They looked at him all of a sudden because they could feel the late king's mana in him. When a spirit reached the level of a death knight, he would form his own ego and a fairly high level of intellectual ability, let alone the vampire lords, the ruler of blood. They were thinking while looking at him. The man they were looking at now was obviously the master of the House of Mammon, that their master, the king of gluttony, had ordered them to attack. If so, should they attack him now, or should they wait and watch the situation a little more? But they didn't have to agonize. Yong-ho had no intention of giving them any time to make the choice from the beginning. His subordinate spirits released their mana at once. Just like those present at the auction house did, they ruthlessly released mana massively. The vampire lords and death knights became trapped in a storm of mana out of the blue. But that wasn't all. In addition to the storm of mana, there was one more thing that threatened and scared them. The death knights instinctively sensed it. The vampire lords looked back in great astonishment. Death was standing there. No life king, namely Skull, that inherited the power of Baphomet, the incarnation of death. The undead who belonged to death felt fear of death before their eyes. The purple energy of death enveloped them, and the last shock struck the undead, 6 towering horns on Yong-ho's head. greed, and gluttony released their powers at the same time. The godly energy of Mammon and that of Fury radiated the light at the same time. The undead couldn't properly control their bodies like those who forgot to breathe. They were overwhelmed by the powerful mana that closed in on them from all sides. The undead army originally prepared by the King of Gluttony. They were his subordinate spirits based on their mutual contact. So, no matter how much Yong-ho possessed the sin of gluttony and mana of the Lake King, it was impossible for him to perfectly control them. So, it was necessary for Yong-ho to renew the contract. As was the case with Salami in the past, he needed to make the contract radical and compulsory. All right, let's move on from now on. He shook his head slightly from side to side. Each of his subordinate spirits also released the mana of gluttony and greed through their own brigada. Wycross, the Red Moon Knight and the head of the Vampire Lords, gulped for the first time since he became a Vampire Lord. Yong-ho approached him. While grabbing the flames of the Red Lotus from the air, he ordered, "It's time for re-education." Shortly afterward, Wycross screamed for the first time since becoming a Vampire Lord. "This is the mask you mentioned. As you requested, I made it in the shape of a dragon." Yong-ho nodded when he saw Bergrim's small blackboard. After congratulating Bergrim in satisfaction, he took the item Bergrim brought to Catalina and Kaiwan. After completing the true and correct re-education of the undead army, Yong-ho ordered his subordinate spirits to rest and headed to his room. He met Bergrim without waiting long. Bergrim, who always worked hard, finished the stuff in a short time that Yong-ho asked for. What Bergrim brought was a mask in the shape of a dragon's head. Since it was worn over the entire head, the mask was actually more like a helmet rather than a mask. Although the color was different, its basic shape was similar to the helmet of a silver dragon armor. While touching the metallic shiny mask, Yong-ho quickly wore it on his head. Just like Bergrim paid special attention to it, he didn't feel any stuffiness when he put it on. "How do I look?" "It's awesome," Catalina clapped, flapping her tail. Seeing her ears flapping as always, he thought she was really impressed with the mask. "It's great, isn't it?" Yong-ho also liked it quite a bit, so he smiled happily and looked at Kaiwan this time. However, unlike Catalina, Kaiwan frowned and snapped, "Isn't it too childish? The color seems too red. More than anything else, you look like a child when you are happily smiling like that." Yong-ho snorted at her comment and said, "I don't think you are not qualified to make such a comment as a woman yelling at me to be ready for punishment, wielding a whip sword every time we spar." Kaiwan flinched at Yong-ho's point that hit the nail on the head. "Nope, I didn't." Yong-ho didn't have to keep a straight face by narrowing his eyes, because Catalina stopped fluttering her ears and tail and said seriously, "Yes, you did." "Yeah, I did," Kaiwan reluctantly agreed. When Yong-ho agreed with Catalina, Kaiwan had no choice but to admit it. With her face and neck turning red, she was at a loss about what to do. But he was not cruel enough to deal another blow to her. He took off the mask and touched it again and smiled. It shouldn't be the House of Mammon that would strike the King of Gluttonous territory. A mysterious force. The being who, wearing the red dragon mask, controlled the elite squad of the highest undead. Now then, shall we get a kick out of it from now on? "Master, do you know you look like a very bad villain right now?" "Sue, I like you better because you're a villain." "I'm really excited to see the mask and attire that your subordinate spirit Kaiwan would be wearing." Lucia spoke to everyone loudly, and Kaiwan, who was blushing, flinched. On the other hand, Catalina laughed quietly. And the next day, Yong-ho began to attack. Dungeons were like castles or fortresses in the human world. Inhabitants of the demon world built their houses around dungeons, and their villages and cities were also settled near the dungeons. Because of this, it was possible to hide the dungeon's internal facilities and scale, but it was almost impossible to hide the fact that the dungeon existed. The kings knew where the dungeons were located in the territory of another country, and they also knew the total number of dungeons very well, even if there was a slight error. There were a total of 56 dungeons, and 40 masters or lords under the King of Gluttony. Yong-ho could know it accurately because he took away everything from him. The 56 dungeons could be divided into 4 major sections. The center, which was directly ruled by the king, and the 3 regions bordering the territories of the King of Violence, the King of Pride, and the Queen of Fury. Most of Mammon's networks were lost, but there were still some left intact. There were a total of 5 doors of space in the territory of the King of Gluttony. So Yong-ho decided to use the door of space near the territory of the King of Violence. Yong-ho devised the plan very carefully. He decided on the order of attack after selecting the list of nearby dungeons from the door of the hidden space at the foot of the Rocky Mountain. His fight this time was different from his dungeon battles in the southern area. Those masters in charge of the dungeons in the territory of the King of Gluttony were united. So, when he decided to target any particular dungeon, it was not just the soldiers of the dungeon in question. If Yong-ho's forces dragged their feet on conquering the dungeon, it was certain that the king's reinforcement army would be dispatched from other dungeons. I feel like a bank robber. So, time attack was important. It would be only after Yong-ho's forces conquered at least 4 dungeons that their attack was noticed by the allies of the King of Gluttony. It was a bright, moonlit night. Yong-ho, who passed through the door of space of the control room on the 9th floor, stood in front of a cave located deep in a lonely rocky mountain. The reason why the door of space could be maintained even after more than 1,000 years was because it was so well hidden like this. Probably, the rest of the intact networks of Mammon were similarly located deep in the mountains where nobody could get access to. After breathing in the cold night air, he put on the red dragon's mask. The reason why he chose the red dragon was because of its association with the King of Violence. Of course, it was impossible for Yong-ho to divert all charges toward the King of Violence with just this small prop. It was too shallow to do that, and Yong-ho didn't even want to make an enemy of the king. All he needed was just a little bit of confusion. And this kind of trick was enough to cause such confusion. Yong-ho looked to his subordinate spirits who stood before him after passing the door of space one by one. He was accompanied by 3 for this operation. Skull, covered with silver armor, cried out excitedly. He was the king of the undead, which would be good as the incarnation of death, but he was a sacred knight now, wearing silver armor that completely covered his body. To conceal his identity, Skull wore a red and ornate cloak and held a sword and shield with colorful decorations instead of a hammer. Catalina wore silver armor like Skull to conceal the fact that she was a dark elf. Her tail, which clearly revealed her attitude, was wrapped around her waist so that it was not exposed outside. And the last member, Chwiryong said while frowning, "I feel like playing a penalty game." "You wear it like that usually, right?" Chwiryong, dressed in a red leotard found in the armory on the 5th floor, kicked his shin, but he gently avoided it. After howling at him, she raised a whip instead of a whip sword. She swept up her hair dyed in gold, then put on a dark red butterfly mask. It was a costume and mask that really suited her. Yong-ho checked the time. It was time for him to move slowly,